Hegel's Phenomenology of Spirit, Religion, Revealed Religion. Through the religion of art, spirit has advanced from the form of substance to assume that of subject, for it produces its outer shape, thus making explicit in it the act, or the self-consciousness, that merely vanishes in the awful substance and does not apprehend its own self in its trust. This incarnation of the divine being starts from the statue, which wears only the outer shape of the self, the inwardness, the self's activity, falling outside of it. But in the cult, the two sides have become one, and in the outcome of the religion of art, this unity in its consummation has even gone right over at the same time to the extreme of the self. In spirit that is completely certain of itself, in the individuality of consciousness, all essentiality is submerged. The proposition that expresses this levity runs: the self is absolute being, the essence, the substance for which the self was only an accident, has sunk to the level of a predicate, and in this self-consciousness over against which there is nothing in the form of essence, spirit has lost its consciousness. This proposition, the self is absolute being, belongs quite obviously to the non-religious actual or secular spirit, and we have to remember which shape of that spirit it is, which expresses it. It will contain the movement and also the conversion of it, which degrades itself to the level of a predicate and elevates substance to subject, and in this manner that the converse proposition does not in itself or for us make substance into subject. Or to put the same thing another way, it does not reinstate substance in such a manner that spirit's consciousness is led back to its beginning, to natural religion. On the contrary, this conversion is one that is brought about for and by self-consciousness itself. Since self-consciousness surrenders itself consciously, it is preserved in its alienation and remains the subject of substance. But since it is likewise self-alienated, it still has the consciousness of the substance. Or since self-consciousness, through its sacrifice, brings forth substance as subject, the substance remains self-consciousness' own self. In the first of the two alternative propositions, the substantiality of the subject merely vanishes, and in the second, substance is only a predicate, and both sides are thus present in each with a contrary inequality of value. Here, however, the result achieved is the union and permeation of the two natures, in which both are with equal value, essential and at the same time only moments, so that spirit is simultaneously consciousness of itself as its objective substance, and simple self-consciousness communing with itself. The religion of art belongs to the ethical spirit, which we earlier saw perish in the condition of right or law. That is, in the proposition, the self as such, the abstract person, is absolute being. In the ethical life, the self is submerged in the spirit of its people. It is the universality that is filled, but simple individuality raises itself out of this content, and its levity refines it into a person, into the abstract universality of right or law. In this, the reality of the ethical spirit is lost, and having lost all content, the spirits of national individuals are gathered into a single pantheon, not into a pantheon of picture thought, whose powerless form lets each spirit go its own way, but into the pantheon of abstract universality, of pure thought, which disembodies them and imparts to the spiritless self, to the individual person, a being that is in and for itself. But this self has, through its emptiness, let the content go free. It is only within itself that consciousness is essence, its own essence. The legal recognition of the person is the unfulfilled abstraction. What it possesses, therefore, is rather only the thought of itself, or in other words, in the mode in which it immediately exists and knows itself as object. It is something that is not actual. Hence, it is only the stoic independence of thought, which passes through the dialectic of the skeptical consciousness to find its truth in that shape which we have called the unhappy self-consciousness. This self-consciousness knows what the validity of the abstract person amounts to in reality and equally in pure thought. It knows that such validity is rather a complete loss. It is itself this conscious loss of itself and the alienation of its knowledge about itself. We see that this unhappy consciousness constitutes the counterpart and the completion of the comic consciousness that is perfectly happy within itself. Into the latter all divine being returns, or it is the complete alienation of substance. The unhappy consciousness, on the other hand, is conversely the tragic fate of the certainty of self that aims to be absolute. It is the consciousness of the loss of all essential being in the certainty of itself, and of the loss even of this knowledge about itself, the loss of substance as well as of the self. It is the grief which expresses itself in the hard saying that God is dead. God is dead. Where have you heard that before? Eh? And this, of course, was before Nietzsche. But the phrase occurs in a Lutheran hymn, because after all, God died on the cross. Cosmic Madonna. Cosmic Madonna. Not comic. As I said, comic consciousness earlier when I'm cosmic. Oh, never mind. Comic consciousness. It's coming up soon again anyway. Comic consciousness. In the condition of right or law, then, the ethical world and the religion of that world are submerged and lost in the comic consciousness, and the unhappy consciousness is the knowledge of this total loss. It has lost both the worth it attached to its immediate personality and the worth attached to its personality as mediated as thought. Trust in the eternal laws of the gods has vanished, and the oracles which pronounced on particular questions are dumb. The statues are now only stones from which the living soul has flown, just as the hymns are words from which belief has gone. The tables of the gods provide no spiritual food and drink, and in his games and festivals man no longer recovers the joyful consciousness of his unity with the divine. The works of the muse now lack the power of the spirit, for the spirit has gained its certainty of itself from the crushing of gods and men. They have become what they are for us now, beautiful fruit already picked from the tree, which a friendly fate has offered us, as a girl might set the fruit before us. It cannot give us the actual life in which they existed, not the tree that bore them, not the earth and the elements which constituted their substance, not the climate which gave them their peculiar character, nor the cycle of the changing seasons that governed the process of their growth. So fate does not restore their world to us along with the works of antique art. It gives not the spring and summer of the ethical life in which they blossomed and ripened, but only the veiled recollection of that actual world. Our active enjoyment of them is therefore not an act of divine worship through which our consciousness might come to its perfect truth and fulfillment. It is an external activity, the wiping off of some drops of rain or specks of dust from these fruits, so to speak, one which erects an intricate scaffolding of the dead elements of their outward existence, the language, the historical circumstances, etc., in place of the inner elements of the ethical life, which environment created and inspired them. And all this we do not in order to enter into their very life, but only to possess an idea of them in our imagination. Well, just as the girl who offers us the plucked fruits is more than the nature which directly provides them, the nature diversified into their conditions and elements, the tree, air, light, and so on, because she sums all this up in a higher mode, in the gleam of her self-conscious eye and in the gesture with which she offers them, so too the spirit of the fate that presents us with those words of art is more than the ethical life and the actual world of that nation, for it is the inwardizing in us of the spirit which in them was still only outwardly manifested. It is the spirit of the tragic fate which gathers all those individual gods and attributes of the divine substance into one pantheon, into the spirit that is itself conscious of itself as spirit. All the conditions for its production are to hand, and this totality of its conditions constitutes its coming to be, its notion, or the production of it in principle. The circle of the creations of art embraces the forms in which absolute substance has externalized itself. Absolute substance is in the form of individuality as a thing, an object of sensuous consciousness that simply is, as pure language or the coming to be of a shape whose existence does not go outside of the self, but is purely a vanishing object, as immediate unity with the universal self-consciousness in its inspiration, and as a mediated unity in the act of the cult, as a beautiful self-like corporeality, and lastly as existence raised into an ideational presentation and the expansion of this existence into a world which finally collects itself together into a universality, which is at the same time a pure certainty of itself. These forms, and on the other side, the world of the person and of law, the destructive ferocity of the freed elements of the content, as also the person as thought in Stoicism, and the unstable restlessness of the skeptical consciousness, constitute the audience or periphery of shapes which stand impatiently expectant around the birthplace of spirit as it becomes self-consciousness, that is, round the manger at Bethlehem. The grief and longing of the unhappy consciousness which permeates them all is their centre and the common birth pang of its emergence, the simplicity of the pure notion which contains those forms as its moments. Spirit has in its two sides, which are presented above, as two converse. Spirit has in it the two sides, which are presented above as two converse propositions. One is this, that substance alienates itself from itself and becomes self-consciousness. The other is the converse, that self-consciousness alienates itself from itself and gives itself the nature of a thing, or makes itself a universal self. Both sides have in this way encountered each other, and through this encounter their true union has come into being. The externalization or kenosis of substance, its growth into self-consciousness, expresses the transition into the opposite, the unconscious transition of necessity. In other words, that substance is in itself self-consciousness. Conversely, the externalization of self-consciousness expresses this, that it is in itself the universal essence, or since the self is pure being, for self, which in its opposite communes with itself, that it is just because substance is self-consciousness for the self, that it is spirit. Of this spirit which has abandoned the form of substance and enters existence in the shape of self-consciousness, it may therefore be said, if we wish to employ relationships derived from natural generation, that it has an actual mother, but an implicit father. For actuality of self-consciousness and the inner self as substance are its two moments through whose reciprocal externalizations, each becoming the other, the spirit comes into existence as this their unity. Insofar as self-consciousness one-sidedly grasps only its own externalization, then, even though its object is for it just as much being as self, and it knows all existence to be spiritual in nature, nevertheless true spirit has still not yet come to be explicitly for self-consciousness, inasmuch as being in general, or substance, has not equally on its side implicitly externalized itself and become self-consciousness, for in that case then all existence is spiritual being only from the standpoint of consciousness, not in its own self. Spirit is in this way only imagined into existence. This imagining is the visionary dreaming, which insinuates into both nature and history, into the world and into the mythical ideas of earlier religions. Another esoteric meaning than that which lies on the surface, and in the case of religions, another meaning than the one known to them by the self-consciousness, whose religions they were. But this meaning is one that is both a garment which does not cover the nakedness of the appearance, and merits neither belief nor reverence. It is no more than the dark night and self-delusive rapture of consciousness. If, therefore, this meaning of the objective is not to be mere imagination, it must possess intrinsic being, must originally appear in consciousness as stemming from the notion, and must come forth in its necessity. It is thus that self-knowing spirit has arisen for us, namely through the cognition of the immediate consciousness, or of the consciousness of the object in its immediacy, through its necessary movement. This notion, which as immediate has also the shape of immediacy for its consciousness, has, in the second place, given itself the shape of implicit self-consciousness, that is, by just the same necessity of the notion by which being, or the immediacy, which is the contentless object of sensuous consciousness, externalizes itself and becomes the I for consciousness. But the immediate in itself, or the necessity that simply is itself different from the in itself that thinks, or from the cognition of necessity as necessity a difference, however, which at the same time does not lie outside of the notion. For the simple unity of the notion is immediate being itself. And the notion is at once a self-externalization or a coming to be of intuitively perceived necessity, and also in this necessity is in communion with itself, knows it and comprehends it. The immediate in itself or spirit that gives itself the shape of self-consciousness means nothing else than that the actual world spirit has attained to this knowledge of itself. It is then too that this knowledge also first enters into its consciousness. How that came about we have already seen. That absolute spirit has given itself implicitly the shape of self-consciousness, and therefore has also given it for its consciousness. This now appears as the belief of the world that spirit is immediately present as a self-conscious being, that is, as an actual man. That the believer is immediately certain of spirit, sees, feels, and hears this divinity. Thus this self-consciousness is not imagination, but is actual in the believer. Consciousness then does not start from its inner life, from thought, and unite within itself the thought of God with existence. On the contrary, it starts from an existence that is immediately present and recognizes God therein. The moment of immediate being is present in the content of the notion in such a way that the religious spirit, in the return of all essentiality into consciousness, has become a simple positive self, just as the actual spirit as such in the unhappy consciousness was just this simple self-conscious negativity. The self of existent spirit has as a result the form of complete immediacy. It is posited neither as something thought or imagined, nor as something produced, as is the case with the immediate self in natural religion, and also in the religion of art. On the contrary, this God is sensuously and directly beheld as a self, as an actual individual man. Only so is this God self-consciousness. This incarnation of the divine being, or the fact that essentially and directly has the shape of self-consciousness, is the simple content of the absolute religion. In this religion, the divine being is known as spirit, or this religion is the consciousness of the divine being that it is spirit. For spirit is the knowledge of oneself in the externalization of oneself, the being that is the movement of retaining its self-identity in its otherness. This, however, is substance, insofar as substance is, in its accidents at the same time, reflected into itself, not indifferent to them as to something unessential or present in them, as in an alien element, but in them it is within itself, that is, insofar as it is subject or self. Consequently, in this religion, the divine being is revealed. Its being revealed obviously consists in this, that what it is known, but it is known precisely in its being known as spirit, as a being that is essentially a self-conscious being, for there is something hidden from consciousness in its object, if the object is for consciousness, an other or something alien, and if it does not know it as its own self. This concealment ceases when the absolute being qua spirit is the object of consciousness. For then the object has the form of self in its relation to consciousness, that is, consciousness knows itself immediately in the object, or it is manifest to itself in the object. Consciousness is manifest to itself only in its own certainty of itself. Its object now is the self, but the self is nothing alien. On the contrary, it is the indissoluble unity with itself, the universal that is immediately such. The infant Jesus. It is the pure notion, pure thought, or being for self, which is immediately being, and consequently being for another. And as this being for another is immediately returned into itself, and in communion with itself, it is therefore that which is truly and alone revealed. The good, the righteous, the holy, the creator of heaven and earth, and so on, are predicates of a subject, universal moments which have their support on this point and only are when consciousness withdraws into thought. As long as it is they that are known, their ground and essence, the subject itself, is not yet revealed, and similarly the determinations of the universal are not this universal itself. The subject itself, and consequently this pure universal too, is, however, revealed as self, for this is just this inner being which is reflected into itself and which is immediately present and is the self-certainty of the self for which it is present. This to be in accordance with its notion, that which is revealed, this is then the true shape of spirit, and this its shape in the notion is likewise alone its essence and its substance. Spirit is known as self-consciousness, and to this self-consciousness it is immediately revealed. For spirit is this self-consciousness itself. The divine nature is the same as the human, and it is this unity that is beheld. Here, therefore, consciousness, or the mode in which essence is for consciousness itself, that is, its shape, is in fact identical with its self-consciousness. This shape is itself a self-consciousness. It is thus at the same time an object in the mode of immediate being, and this being likewise immediately has the significance of pure thought, or of absolute being. The absolute being, which exists as an actual self-consciousness, seems to have come down from its eternal simplicity, but by this coming down it has in fact attained for the first time to its own highest essence, for it is only when the notion of essence has reached its simple purity that it is the absolute abstraction which is pure thought, and hence the pure individuality of self, just as on account of its simplicity it is also the immediate or being. What is called self-consciousness is just this pure abstraction. It is this thinking for which being is the immediate. Thus the lowest is at the same time the highest, the revealed, which has come forth wholly onto the surface, is precisely therein the most profound, that the Supreme Being is seen, heard, etc., as an immediately present self-consciousness. This therefore is indeed the consummation of its notion, and through this consummation that being is immediately present qua Supreme Being. This immediate existence is at the same time not solely and simply immediate consciousness, but its religious consciousness. The immediacy has inseparably the meaning not only of a self-consciousness that immediately is, but also of the Supreme Being as an absolute essence in pure thought, or absolute being. What we are conscious of in our notion, namely that being is in essence, is what the religious consciousness is also conscious of. This unity of being in essence, of thought, which is immediately existence, is both the thought of this religious consciousness, or its mediated knowledge, and equally its immediate knowledge, its mediated knowledge, and equally its immediate knowledge. Yes. For this unity of being and thought is self-consciousness and is itself immediately present, or the thought unity has at the same time this essential shape of what it is. Here, therefore, God is revealed as he is. He is immediately present as he is in himself. That is, he is immediately present as spirit. God is attainable in pure speculative knowledge alone, and is only in that knowledge, and is only in that knowledge itself. For he is spirit. And this speculative knowledge is the knowledge of the revealed religion. Speculative knowledge knows God as thought or pure essence, and knows this thought as simple being and as existence as the negativity of itself, hence as self, as the self that is at the same time this individual, and also the universal self. It is precisely this that the revealed religion knows. The hopes and expectations of the world up till now had pressed forward solely to this revelation, to behold what absolute being is, and in it to find itself. The joy of beholding itself in absolute being enters self-consciousness and seizes the whole world, for it is spirit. It is the simple movement of those pure moments which expresses just this, that only when absolute being is beheld as an immediate self-consciousness is it known as spirit. This notion of spirit that knows itself as spirit is itself the immediate notion and is not yet developed. Absolute being is spirit, i.e. it has appeared, it is revealed. This first revelation is itself immediate, but the immediacy is equally pure mediation or thought, and it must therefore exhibit this in its own sphere as such. Looking at this more closely, spirit in the immediacy of self-consciousness is this individual self-consciousness, and so in an antithesis to the universal self-consciousness. It is an exclusive one or unit which has the still unresolved form of a sensuous other for the consciousness for which it is immediately present. This other does not as yet know spirit as its own, that is, spirit as an individual self is not yet equally the universal self, the self of everyone. In other words, the shape has not as yet the form of the notion, that is, of the universal self, of the self that in its immediate actuality is at the same time a superseded self, namely thought. Universality without losing its actuality in this universality. But this proximate form of this universality, the form that is itself immediate, is not yet the form of thought itself, of the notion, as notion, but the universality of reality, the allness of or totality of the selves, and the raising of existence into an ideational form, as in every case. And to cite a specific example, the superseded this of sense is, in the first place, the thing of perception, and not yet the universal of the understanding. The Passion of Christ. Dali was definitely a genius, what he can capture with just that. Excellent stuff. This individual man, then, which absolute being has revealed itself to be, accomplishes in himself as an individual the movement of sensuous being. He is the immediately present God, consequently his being passes over into having been. Consciousness, for which God is thus sensually present, ceases to see and to hear him. It has seen and heard him, and it is because it only has seen and heard him that it first becomes itself spiritual consciousness, or, in other words, just as formerly he rose up for consciousness as a sensuous existence, now he has arisen in the spirit. For a consciousness that sensuously sees and hears him is itself a merely immediate consciousness, which has not overcome the disparity of objectivity, has not taken it back into pure thought. It knows this objective individual, but not itself as spirit. in the vanishing of the immediate existence known to be absolute being. The immediacy receives its negative moment. The spirit remains the immediate self of actuality, but as the universal self-consciousness of the self-consciousness of the religious community. A self-consciousness which reposes in its own substance, just as in this substance is a universal subject, not the individual by himself, but together with the consciousness of the community, and what he is for this community is the complete whole of the individual as spirit. Remoteness in time and space is, however, only the imperfect form in which the immediate mode of existence is given a mediated or universal character. It is merely dipped superficially in the element of thought, is preserved in it as a sensuous mode, and not made one with the nature of thought itself. It is merely raised into the realm of picture thinking, for this is the synthetic combination of sensuous immediacy and its universality or thought. Now, this form of picture thinking constitutes the specific mode in which spirit in this community becomes aware of itself. This form is not yet spirit self-consciousness that has advanced to its notion, qua notion. The mediation is still incomplete. This combination of being and thought is, therefore, defective in that spiritual being is still burdened with an unreconciled split into a here and a beyond. The content is the true content, but all its moments, when placed in the medium of picture thinking, have the character of being uncomprehended in terms of the notion of appearing as completely independent sides which are externally connected with each other. Before the true content can also receive its true form for consciousness, a high formative development of consciousness is necessary. It must raise its intuition of absolute substance into the notion and equate its consciousness with its self-consciousness for itself, just as this has happened for us, or in itself. This content is to be considered as it exists in its consciousness. Absolute spirit is the content, and is thus in the shape of its truth. But its truth is to be not merely the substance or the in itself, or of the community, and not merely to step forth out of this inwardness into the objectivity of picture thinking, but to become an actual self, to reflect itself into itself, and to be subject. This, therefore, is the movement which it accomplishes in its community, or this is the life of the community. Consequently, what this self-revealing spirit is in it and for itself is not elicited by, as it were, unravelling the rich life of spirit in the community and tracing it back to its original strands, to the idea, say, of the primitive imperfect community, or even to the utterances of the actual man himself. This tracing back is based on the instinct to get to the notion, but it confuses the origin of the notion as the immediate existence of the first manifestation with the simplicity of the notion. What results from this impoverishment of spirit, from getting rid of the idea of the community and its action with regard to its idea, is not the notion, but rather bare externality and singularity, the historical manner of the manifestation in its immediacy, and the non-spiritual recollection of a supposed individual figure and of its past. Spirit is the content of its consciousness, at first in the form of pure substance, or is the content of its pure consciousness. This element of thought is the movement of descending into existence or into individuality. The middle term between these two is their synthetic connection, the consciousness of passing into otherness, or picture thinking as such. The third movement is the return from picture thinking and otherness, or the element of self-consciousness itself. These three moments constitute spirit. Its dissociation, its picture thinking consists in its existing in a specific or determinate mode, but this determinateness is nothing else than one of its moments. Its complete movement is therefore this, to diffuse its nature throughout each of its moments as in its native element, since each of these spheres completes itself within itself. This reflection of one sphere into itself is at the same time the transition into another. Picture thinking constitutes the middle term between pure thought and self-consciousness as such, and is only one of these specific or determinate forms. At the same time, however, as we have seen, its character, that of being a synthetic connection, is diffused throughout all these elements and is their common determinateness. The content itself, which we have to consider, has partly been met with already as the idea of the unhappy and the believing consciousness. But in the former it has the character of a content, produced from consciousness from which spirit yearns, and in which spirit cannot be satiated or find rest, because it is not yet in itself its own content, or is not the substance of it. In the believing consciousness, on the other hand, the content was regarded as the selfless being of the world, or as essentially an objective content of picture thinking, of a picture thinking that simply flees from reality and consequently is without the certainty of self-consciousness, which is separated from it partly by the conceit of knowing and partly by pure insight. The consciousness of the community, on the other hand, possesses the content for its substance, just as the content is the certainty of the community's own spirit. Crucifixion for Gala. I'm not quite sure what he's saying there, but that's what the painting is called. Well, we're nearly there. Just another video on revealed religion. And then we are finally at absolute knowing.